The book of Exodus is the most iconic of the five books of Moses. This is where you get really the bulk of the story of Moses and what he's known for, bringing the children of Israel, really this nation, out of Egypt. All this takes place within this book. So there's 40 chapters in the book, and the first couple chapters kind of pick up where Genesis left off. Now, from the New Testament, we know that there's about 430 years that's passed. Different opinions on the passage of time, but we hear that from the New Testament. And as you go into the difference of Pharaoh's passing, of course, that period of time, regardless of whatever the time was, there's going to be a succession of different pharaohs. But the Pharaoh in charge at the beginning of Exodus does not know Joseph, and the people are in bondage. There's this fear now of the Egyptians being usurped by these people, and so they're enslaved. They actually begin to kill the newborn babies, the males. Of course, there's a foreshadow here to the New Testament when Jesus comes onto the scene. And you see Moses being saved in a unique situation that he brings us our minds back to the flood account and being saved through the water, the pitch and the tar that's covering this boat, this small basket that the baby is placed in. All these things are to first of all to tell the story of how God works in these specific ways in lives, but many of these things are types and shadows that point towards what will happen in the New Testament. So you have the first couple of chapters of who is Moses, what's the context, and then we have a large gap where we don't know what happened as Moses was growing up. We do know somehow he knew about his identity. This is part how he flees into the wilderness after killing an Egyptian. And from there, he actually winds up marrying someone that would be at least semi-connected to the family. Zipporah is her name. She actually has a very strong, shining moment at the end of chapter 4. That's a very murky passage as well, but I believe very profound. All the different things that would take place in Moses' life are interesting in that he has really strong moments, but really many weaknesses as well. And he's a person that the farther you go through the story, the character becomes stronger and stronger. Now, the other siblings that he has, Aaron is the older brother, and Miriam, the eldest. She was the one that kind of watched him as he was going down the river to make sure everything was okay. And then Aaron becomes very central. Comes onto the scene right after Moses' hesitancy at the burning bush, and from there would become eventually, the high priest figure. Eventually, Jesus will become the king and priest after the order of Melchizedek way back in Genesis 14, where you have this figure who is both the political leader and a priest. And here in Exodus, likely because of the lack of strength, or really Moses's uncertainty about going through with these things, this responsibility is given to these two brothers. And as you go forward, you'll see this play out a little bit differently, maybe when you get to David, again, who's very similar to Jesus himself as far as like a type, shadow. But otherwise, typically, there's priest, king, these different roles of leadership. So the burning bush is one of the major parts of this. This appears in chapter 3. Moses is out in the wilderness with the sheep, some ways away from home. Many believe this is it's like Sinai, like Horeb region. The geography of this can be a little bit suspect. You have to take many different things into account when you're considering the route of the Red Sea, escape through the wilderness, all these different things. If you're going to try to pinpoint, and really the location of Sinai in general is hotly debated. But regardless of that, it's very likely the same region where this is, somewhere at least semi-close to Midian. And the bush that is on fire is not consumed. This is what's known as a theophany, a appearance of God to man, and it's specifically called the angel of the Lord. But what's unique about this is the angel of the Lord speaks with God's authority, the divine name of God being within the angel. So there's a lot going on here. We're told about the I am name of God, and not the first time here used, but Yahweh is again used as the specific identified name of God. This was something that had been presented way back in Genesis 28. So you have all these different things going on. Again, there's a hesitancy by Moses, assurance given with Aaron. It seems like maybe that there is a little bit of a disobedience, a flightiness. Something happens with Moses' son, and Zipporah actually is the one that circumcises him, fulfilling the role of a priest here in this. So there's lots of things going on in that account. But by the time you get to Pharaoh, we already know prophetically that God has said that he would harden Pharaoh's heart. This is something that is within Christian circles, and especially based on Romans 9, which says that God hardens who he hardens, and elects and has this kind of picking and choosing of things. When you actually look at the account of Exodus, yes, from God's perspective, things are eternal, but there is a responsibility that's laid upon Pharaoh as well. So things go both ways. God certainly does harden his heart, but Pharaoh is culpable as well. Now, Pharaoh in this time is like the living image, like the one to be worshipped in this Egyptian culture. And so not only is this Pharaoh versus Moses is kind of this God of Israel versus all the gods of Egypt, which this is summed up in Pharaoh himself. Some of the kings, like King Tut, the name etymology actually breaks down to be like the living image of Amun, one of the gods. So again, this kind of idol worship, like literally thinking of something, kind of the way Caesar would become eventually in the Roman system. This idea of the leader being a physical representation of God that it wants to worship is something that's very present here. And I believe part of the way that the hardening and all these things take place. So the plagues come upon Egypt as a way for God to get glory in the nations. Jethro, I believe in chapter 18, it says that now we know that God is above all the gods. You see this play itself all the way out to when you get to Joshua, past these 5 books of Moses, the conquest of Jericho. Rahab is amazed that the reputation that has preceded the people has gone throughout the nation. So a lot of that's because of what's taking place right here with the plagues culminating in very powerful acts that break Pharaoh's heart. You have original kind of what you would call like almost like sleight of hand kind of things with the snake and the rod. There's even a leprosy thing that God is able to do up on the mountain and then show to the elders of the people later. By the time you get to Pharaoh, of course, his own magicians can do these things too. But then you start to have plagues that are like acts of God plagues, like things that you can't account for by just simple kind of magic type stuff. And so, whereas to us, even a snake, rod becoming a snake, that seems very powerful. In this kind of occult pagan environment, these things were things that could happen. You have the Nile turning blood. It keeps going deeper and deeper to where the whole sky is dark. And a lot of these plagues are unique in that the place where the Israelites lived, the land of Goshen within Egypt, that was not affected by some of these plagues. So there's a difference here in that there's a geographical kind of segmenting of the plagues themselves. So again, it gets all the way to the point to the firstborn dying as the final plague. And there's this great look to the building things that would go throughout the Old Testament and looking towards the New Testament of the Passover, all the procedure dealing with the lamb, the blood over the doorposts, that points towards, again, the future. And really, again, the angel of the Lord, this kind of death angel, is another picture of judgment, end time judgment, really, of how Jesus himself comes back to thresh the world and divide sheep from goats and wheat from tares. And you see this happening even early on here. So all these images are intentionally meant to portray all kind of things from us mentally. The Exodus escape through the Red Sea is something that you see God's hardening a Pharaoh's heart. He eventually relents, then changes his mind again, pursues them to the sea, to the ocean. The water itself is a means of salvation for the people and judgment for Pharaoh and the troops. And this is really dramatized in very big language in chapter 15. The Song of Miriam is a song of victory, but all these things kind of point back to creation. You think about all the plagues and kind of like this almost like deconstructing of what was created originally. In the same way, now the water and some of the very early language of Genesis comes into play here as well. So all this goes on in the first 14, 15 chapters, and then you begin to have some things that take place chronologically, but in ways that show what would happen as they go on. So pieces that are chronological, pieces that aren't. You have manna, the provision from God. First of all, the people are grumbling like right off the bat, and then you have a kind of a leadership system set up. You have water from the rock. You have so many different things that would take place that would set up what would come. And then Sinai itself is the giving of the Ten Commandments. The way this is set up as a whole, the covenant itself is centralized around the Ten Commandments being given, something that is done publicly in like full display of the glory of God on the Sinai. There's a level of where certain ones would come here and certain ones would get to enter into a deeper part of the mountain. Of course, Moses and even Joshua splash. Surprisingly, most people don't catch the times you see Joshua being involved with Moses, but he is right in there. And you have these different levels of things that you'll become more and more familiar with as you get into the kind of the priestly system. But God is doing something and revealing kind of a nature of himself, the holiness of God. You'll start to see this pick up as God calls us distinct people unto himself. There's boundaries that have to be set up. Now, God saves his people with no holds barred, like no requirements. Even you see Moses' failure early on. Aaron's failure will be very apparent in chapter 32. But when it comes to actually the salvation taking place, then you have these guardrails that are set up for people in the sense of the law being given. Chapters 21 through 23, once you get past the Ten Commandments, are what's known as case laws, kind of a hodgepodge of things that you would see throughout the time, not just in wilderness, but even when they were in the land, different laws and ways that the Ten Commandments were applied to whatever was going on. These are very specific kind of one-off laws. And from there, you have chapter 24 of the covenant being like ratified, this meal even that the people have with God. And so again, a lot of things that you could just kind of skip over easily, but there's very deep theological meaning to these things. The final 15 chapters, or between chapters 25 and 40, 16, I guess, you have two main kind of bookend pieces that go all around Exodus 32, 33, and 34. Now, Exodus 32, 33, and 34, you have the golden calf incident. Obviously a great need for accountability, and regardless of the people's motive, trying to explain it away. God's not happy, and first of all, Moses intercedes for them just so God wouldn't just start over and say, okay, Moses, I'm gonna make a great nation from you. That would still have been from Abraham, but like that's not the way this goes. Moses says, look, if that's the case, take my name out of your book. Like, don't, if you're gonna take them out, then take mine out. So all these things take place as you go forward, and there is some kind of intercession. The sons of Levi respond to a call. It is a call of judgment, but then you see eventually the Levites become a terminology, especially in the book of Leviticus. And to this point, it had just kind of been Aaron in the language. So all these things unfold as you go forward. You'll see the tabernacle being built through the back half of the chapter, the instructions for the Ark, the covenant, and all these different pieces, giving understanding of God's holiness and worship in this imperfect context pointing to Christ. All this takes place in this time period. So these bookend this central piece in the middle. But in chapter 34, it talks about, your presence is not going to be the same, but without your presence, we're not willing to go. And you see the presence show up in a powerful way in the final stanza of the book at the very conclusion of chapter 40.